Hey Team Bio, welcome to your screencast on inheritance. So we've been talking about the central dogma, how DNA is transcribed into RNA and then translated into protein, and your proteins lead to your traits and behaviors. And today's screencast is going to explain a mode of inheritance called simple, dominant, and recessive, which is going to explain why, for example, maybe you have a trait that neither of your parents exhibit. And how is that possible? We're going to explain it today using the model of simple, dominant versus recessive inheritance. So connecting what's happening in the DNA to the traits and behaviors that we see. Okay, so quick reminder, we are all dihybrid individuals, meaning we have, oh, that's not what I meant to say. I meant to say we're diploid. Haha, we're diploid. Dihybrid cross is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. DIP. Okay, we're diploid individuals, which means we have two N chromosomes, N being the number of homologous chromosomes, meaning we have two copies of every gene. The gene that we're going to be talking about in today's screencast is the MRC1 gene. And the MRC1 gene determines if you have freckles or not. If you have, there are two alleles of the MRC1 gene. The first allele is the big F allele, capital F, and this is the freckles allele. It is dominant. And the little f allele is freckleless. Freckleless? I just made that word up, I think. No freckles. This is recessive. So these are the two alleles. That was a terrible curly braces. Two alleles of the MRC1 gene. Typically, we make the capital letter the dominant allele and the lowercase letter the recessive allele. That's just generally how people do it. Okay, but there are two copies of every gene, and so there are a couple different variations of what alleles you might have. You could be someone whose genotype is big F, big F. And this would mean so this is your genotype, the two alleles that you have in your chromosome. So we look at them. This is the location on the chromosome with the MRC1 gene in this green box here. And if you have the blue dash here, that means you have a big F copy of the gene. Your genotype is big F, and you are homozygous dominant. And your phenotype, meaning the characteristics that you exhibit, is that you have freckles. And let's put this in green. Your phenotype is freckles. Okay, but you also could have one copy of the big F allele in blue and one copy of the little f allele here in purple, which means your genotype is big F, little f, and your genotype is also, we call this heterozygous. So if you are heterozygous, hello.
Oh, hello.
How's it going, Jules?
Good.
This also means that you have freckles. Oh, sorry guys, I'm doing a screencast, so I think if you want to talk, yeah. Thanks. Okay, so your phenotype is you have freckles. So if you're heterozygous, you have the same phenotype as if you're homozygous dominant. You have freckles either way, even if you have one copy of this little f allele. This is because the capital F allele is dominant over the little f allele. So the only way that you'll have no freckles is if you are little f. This is homozygous recessive. So if you're homozygous recessive, you are freckleless. I think I'm spelling freckles wrong. I did. Whoops. There's a freckle. Freckles. Delete. Copy. Paste. Okay. Freckleless. And let's highlight it in pink here. Okay, so what happens if you take two people who are both heterozygous, meaning that they both have one copy of the big F allele and one copy of the little f allele, and you mate them together, or they decide to have children? What will we potentially see in their children? So both these people have freckles, but let's talk about what can happen in meiosis. So we take this person here, and we look at a cell of theirs. We see that they have one copy of the big F allele, one copy of the little f allele, and then after S phase, the chromosomes duplicate, they look like this, and after they undergo meiosis, we see that they create gametes that have, some of the gametes have the big F allele, and some of the gametes have the little f allele. And so that's going to be true regardless whether or not who you are. If you are the male in the cross or the female in the cross, you can both produce gametes that have the big F allele or gametes that have the little f allele. And likewise here, you can produce gametes that have the big F allele or the little f allele. When we're just examining one trait, we call this a monohybrid cross. Okay, so a monohybrid cross is when we look at one gene and its inheritance pattern across 2 generations. Okay, so the way that we analyze this is we set up what's called a Punnett square. A Punnett square, named after Sir Alfred Punnett, works this way. You take the possible gametes that the individuals in the cross can produce and you put them on the outside of the square. So for our case, because we have 2 people that are both heterozygous, they can produce gametes that have the big F allele or the little f allele, and that's true for both of them. If this person were homozygous dominant, they could only produce big F alleles, and so we'd have to have the Punnett square look like that. But they're not. They're heterozygous, so they can produce either of these. So we put the gametes that they can produce on the outside of the box, and on the inside of the box, we imagine these gametes fusing together, the egg and sperm coming together, and we make the diploid inside of the square. So you can see here when we fill out the square, we get this pattern. So people who have freckles can produce babies that have freckles, or babies that don't have freckles, are freckleless. And the ratio that we expect to see this in is 3 to 1. So if these people had, let's say, 100 children, we'd expect 75% of them, or 75 of them, to have freckles, and 25% of them to be freckleless. Now, we might not see exactly those numbers, but as the numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger, we would expect to be closer and closer to those averages. So the phenotypic ratio is 3 to 1, and the genotypic ratio, FF to FF to FF, is 1 to 2 to 1. So here are the phenotypic ratios, 3 to 1, freckles to freckleless, and then the genotypic ratios are 1 to 2 to 1, So that's it. That's how we do a Punnett square, and helps explain why sometimes we see babies that don't have traits that both of their parents have. It means that their parents are heterozygous for that gene. Okay, that's all. See you tomorrow.